Right now, somewhere in your home, an animal is watching you. It knows the sound of your footsteps before you reach the door. It knows the difference between your work bag and your gym bag. It knows when you're sad, even when you haven't said a word. But here's the question that nobody really stops to ask. Does it know you're not one of its own? Most people assume the answer is obvious. Of course dogs know what they are. Of course they understand the difference between a human and another dog. We walk on two legs. We don't bark. We smell completely different. The distinction seems self-evident, almost too simple to even question. And yet, modern animal psychology suggests something far stranger is happening inside your dog's mind. Something that challenges everything we think we know about how animals perceive the world around them. The real answer isn't simple. It isn't obvious, and once you hear it, you'll never look at your dog the same way again. Let's start with something researchers noticed decades ago, something that seemed almost too small to matter at first. Point at something across the room, gesture toward it with your finger. A wolf, even a wolf raised by humans from birth, will look at your hand. It doesn't understand what pointing means. It sees the gesture but cannot follow the invisible line it draws toward an object in the distance. Your dog does this effortlessly. Researchers like Brian Hare at Duke University spent years studying this exact ability, the capacity to follow a human pointing gesture, and what they found was remarkable. Dogs didn't learn this skill through training. Puppies who had never been taught anything could follow a human's pointed finger from the very first time they encountered it. Even young puppies, barely weeks old, understood the social signal. This isn't a trick. This is cognition. This is your dog reading your mind in the most literal sense available to an animal. But the question this raises is even more interesting than the answer. Why dogs? Why not wolves? They share almost identical DNA. They descended from the same ancestor. So what happened in the space between wolves and dogs that created this extraordinary sensitivity to human communication? And more importantly, what does it tell us about how dogs actually see us? Here's where the thinking needs to shift entirely, because we've been asking the wrong question. We keep asking, what species does your dog think you are? But that framing assumes dogs organize the world the way humans do, by category, by classification, by biological group. Dogs don't do that. They organize the world by something else entirely. The better question is this: what role does your dog believe you play in its life? And when you ask it that way, the science becomes extraordinary. Attachment theory, originally developed to understand the bond between human infants and their caregivers, has been carefully applied to dogs over the past 2 decades. Researchers designed what's called the strange situation test, originally used with children, and ran it with dogs and their owners. The results were striking. Dogs use their humans as a secure base. When a familiar owner is present, a dog explores freely, takes risks, investigates the unknown. When the owner leaves, the dog shows signs of stress. When the owner returns, the dog settles. This is the exact same pattern seen in securely attached human children with their parents. Think about what that means. Your dog isn't just bonded to you the way an animal bonds to a food source. It's bonded to you the way a child bonds to a parent. You are its emotional anchor. You are the thing it measures safety against. Without you in the room, the world becomes uncertain. With you present, everything becomes possible. If dogs see us as safety itself, as the foundation of their emotional world, does that mean they see us as something like parents? Or is the relationship something even more complex than that? Leave that thought open for a moment, because here's where it gets even more interesting. In 2015, researcher Takafumi Kikusui and his team in Japan studied what happens when dogs and humans make eye contact. They measured oxytocin, the bonding hormone released during moments of connection in both the dogs and their owners. What they found was a mutual loop. Dogs who gazed at their humans showed elevated oxytocin. The humans who gazed back showed elevated oxytocin too. The same biological mechanism that bonds mothers to infants was activating between species. This loop doesn't happen between humans and wolves. Even wolves raised by humans, socialized from birth, familiar with human presence, they don't create this response. The loop is specific to dogs. Something in the 10,000 years of domestication didn't just change their behavior, it rewired their neurobiology. It created a bridge between two entirely different nervous systems. Which brings us back to wolves. Why them, and not their ancestors? Why did domestication produce this specific thing, this ability to bond, to read, to attach, when wolves living in similar proximity to humans never developed it? The answer seems to lie in selection. Over thousands of generations, the animals that survived near humans were the ones who could read human emotion, follow human communication, and form emotional bonds across the species divide. It wasn't just survival of the fittest. It was survival of the most socially fluent. The dogs alive today are the descendants of every ancestor who looked at a human and understood something essential about them. So if your dog knows, on some level, that you're not a dog, then what exactly are you? Are you its owner, its caretaker, its pack leader, its parent, or something the human language doesn't quite have a word for? Think about what your dog actually does. It follows you to the bathroom not because it needs something, but because being near you feels right. It waits at the door not because it's trained to, but because your return is the event its entire day has been building toward. Before it does something uncertain, approaches a stranger, investigates a strange sound, it looks at your face first. Not the way an animal checks for danger, the way a child checks for reassurance. Every morning it chooses you again, not out of habit, not out of dependency alone, out of something that, in another species, we would simply call love. Slow down here and really sit with that. Every reunion, every time you've walked through that door and been greeted like you returned from the edge of the world that wasn't performance. That was your dog's entire emotional system saying, "You came back. The anchor is here. Everything is safe again." Every long look across a quiet room, every time it moved closer when you cried, every time it placed its head on your knee without being asked. That was the oxytocin loop running. That was 10,000 years of evolution speaking through a single moment of stillness. Now, after all of that, here is the answer. Do dogs know they're not human? Research suggests they probably do understand, in some meaningful way, that humans are different from dogs. They distinguish between species. They respond differently to dogs and humans in measurable ways. They are not confused about the basic categories of the world they live in. But, and this is the part that changes everything, they don't think about species the way humans do. Dogs don't appear to categorize the world through biological classification. They categorize it through social relationship, through attachment, through safety and belonging. When your dog looks at you, it doesn't seem to be thinking, "That creature is a Homo sapien." It seems to be thinking something much more specific and much more profound. "That is my person." You are not a dog to it. You are not a wolf. You are not simply another animal sharing its space. You are something that the dog brain appears to have created, an entirely unique social category for something that exists outside the normal rules, something that gets access to the deepest parts of its emotional world. Not pack, not prey, not stranger, person. The truth is, your dog probably doesn't spend its days wondering what species it belongs to. It doesn't lie on its bed contemplating its own identity or yours. Those are human questions, born from human self-consciousness. What your dog carries instead is something simpler and perhaps more beautiful. Out of every creature on this earth, across all the noise and complexity of the living world, it found you, it memorized you, it built its sense of safety around you. It chose, in every quiet moment and every loud reunion, to orient its entire emotional life in your direction. Maybe the question was never really about species at all. Maybe it was always about this. That somewhere between wolf and human, between wildness and home, Two entirely different kinds of being looked at each other and decided without words, without reason, without needing to understand the biology of what was happening, that they belonged to each other. Your dog may not know what you are, but it knows completely and without doubt that you are its. And maybe that is the only answer that has ever really mattered. Think about your dog for a moment. Has there ever been a time when you noticed danger, fear, or sadness before you did? Share your story in the comments.